My husband was unfaithful. His mistress, feeling triumphant, reclined on my bed and sent me a photo. Your husband is sleeping so peacefully in my arms. I merely smiled and ignored her message. Instead, I turned my attention to finding her current boyfriend. I wasn't just planning to expose her. I wanted to ensure they both faced consequences. On our anniversary, I went all out, prepared an elaborate dinner and carefully chosen gifts, eager to surprise my husband, Leo. I had no idea that this day would turn into my worst nightmare. My name is Wendy. I'm an ER doctor. It had taken a lot of effort to get this day off, solely to celebrate with him. But as the food grew cold, Leo still hadn't come home. No response on social media. No answer on his phone. Outside, the sky darkened, and the wind howled, rattling the windows. Anxiety gnawed at me. I called again. Just as the ringtone was about to cut off, he finally picked up. Don't wait for me. Eat without me. Then, in the background, I heard an automated hospital announcement. B0125. Please proceed to CT room 2. My heart sank. Are you at the hospital? Are you hurt? Before Leo could respond, I heard him say, Don't come here. But I had already hung up and was racing out the door. My mind swarmed with terrifying thoughts. Was he injured? Was it serious? Why hadn't he told me immediately? When I reached the hospital and saw him standing there unharmed, I exhaled in relief. But then I froze. Leo was gently wiping away the tears of a young woman, his voice soothing as he reassured her everything would be all right. Then, he lightly patted the back of her head. Anger surged through me. What exactly is going on here? Leo's face flickered with guilt before he quickly masked it with irritation. Didn't I tell you not to come? You ignored my messages and calls. What was I supposed to do? The weather was awful. I nearly got into an accident. And instead of worrying about me, you're scolding me? The girl beside him, visibly shaken, stood up and hastily tried to explain. Wendy, please don't misunderstand. The wind was so strong today that when I left the office, a signboard fell and hit me. Leo happened to be nearby and insisted on bringing me here. That was when I noticed the small bruise on her forehead. She looked frail and distressed, as if I was the one attacking her. She was young, pretty, and helpless. I recognized her. Sandy. She worked at Leo's company. As she spoke, she cast him a cautious glance. Leo, you should explain. I don't want to cause trouble in your marriage. Then, almost imperceptibly, she tugged at his sleeve. Leo sighed, clearly annoyed. There's nothing between us. Wendy, you're overreacting. His words hit me like a slap. Was I really misunderstanding? Or was he trying to dismiss my suspicions with anger? My chest tightened. This was the first time he had spoken to me so coldly. And it was all because of a woman I barely knew. Their subtle interactions played over in my mind. His behavior tonight was different. Too defensive, too dismissive. But without proof, pressing the issue would only make me seem irrational. And Sandy wasn't as naive as she pretended to be. Suppressing my emotions, I smiled at her and took Leo's arm. I trust my husband completely. But you should know, he has one flaw. He's too kind-hearted, always helping people without thinking. Before Leo could react, I led him away. As we walked off, I caught a glimpse of Sandy's expression twisting with irritation. Doubt is like a seed. Once planted, it grows on its own. I needed time to uncover the truth. Once we exited the hospital, I let go of Leo's arm and hurried toward the car, unable to keep up the charade. Heavy raindrops began to fall, chilling me to the bone. Leo followed, his frustration mounting. Wendy, are you seriously doing this? Now it's going to be awkward between me and my coworker. I didn't respond, just walked faster and climbed into the car. As I reached for the ignition, Leo grabbed the keys. His expression was stern, but his tone softened. You embarrassed her enough already. Can we drop this? That was the final straw. Somehow, a situation that should have been his fault had become my overreaction. He never once considered my feelings. Fuming, I shifted to the passenger seat, slammed the door, and fastened my seatbelt. Outside, the wind had died down, but the rain drummed against the windows, mirroring my chaotic thoughts. Maybe I was being paranoid. Leo was tall, handsome, mature, responsible. Of course, a younger woman might admire him. But as long as he maintained boundaries, that should be fine. Right? Marriage isn't just about love. It's about effort. And yet, just as I started calming down, Leo spoke again. She's just a kid who had a tough upbringing. No need to be jealous. Everyone in the company sees her as a little sister. I turned to him sharply. Does treating her like a sister include touching her face and letting her cling to you? Do you think I'm blind? My mind flashed back to the way she looked at him, how she subtly sought his attention. My anger reignited. She has a boyfriend. Stop making things up. Leo's voice was cold as he accelerated. The storm outside intensified, reducing visibility, but he drove recklessly, fueled by frustration. Suddenly, the car jolted to a stop. My seatbelt yanked me back just in time. Before I could react, Leo rolled down the window and started yelling. Are you trying to get yourself killed, walking into the road like that? Outside stood a middle-aged woman, drenched in the rain. She bowed quickly in apology. I'm so sorry. There's an emergency at home. I thought I could make it across in time. Without another word, she hurried off on her electric bike. As I sat back down, my heart pounded. Leo's face remained dark with anger. He said nothing, driving slightly slower now. Staring out the window, I was lost in thought. If he hadn't braked in time, or if it had been a man instead of an older woman, things could have gone horribly wrong. And all because he was too furious at me to drive safely. Was this an attempt to intimidate me into silence? If I kept questioning him, would he eventually do something worse? The doubt I felt earlier was now an undeniable certainty. This wasn't just about another woman. It was about the man I thought I knew. And the realization that maybe I never really did. Afterward, he casually made an excuse to leave. You provoked me. You know I have a temper when I drive. He understood me too well, expertly manipulating my emotions. Yet, his cold indifference sent shivers down my spine. It was as if I had never truly known this man. For the sake of both our lives, I forced myself to suppress my emotions, silence my doubts, and bury my resentment on this stormy night. Upon returning home, Leo noticed the meal and cake laid out on the table. Only then did it dawn on him that today marked our first wedding anniversary. Since I had the day off, I had asked him that morning, "Do you have dinner plans tonight? If not, let's eat at home." Without hesitation, he agreed. I assumed he was pretending to forget as part of a surprise. But in truth, he had simply forgotten. I had eagerly prepared surprises and gifts for him, yet now, it all felt foolish and humiliating. Darling, I'm sorry. We were both too sensitive today, Leo said, stepping forward to embrace me. I dodged his touch. A fleeting trace of guilt crossed his face. I'll warm up the food and slice the cake. We ate in silence, lost in our own thoughts. The reheated meal lacked the warmth and vibrance of freshly cooked food, much like our marriage. This was our first anniversary, often called the paper anniversary. Was our marriage really as fragile as paper? After showering, I lay in bed, feigning sleep. Soon, I heard the familiar click of a medicine bottle. His melatonin pills, which he never missed. Typically taken 5 hours before bedtime, but tonight, much later than usual. A while later, I felt the mattress dip slightly. I remained motionless, regulating my breathing. He leaned in to kiss me, but when I didn't respond, he withdrew. We both knew neither of us was asleep. Eventually, his breathing steadied into deep slumber, yet my thoughts raced, keeping me wide awake. Doubt had taken root, and I couldn't ignore it. Feigning unconscious movement, I let my leg drape over Leo. He remained unresponsive, deeply asleep. Carefully, I reached for his phone on the bedside table and tiptoed to the study. Unlocking it proved effortless. His password remained unchanged. I hesitated. Perhaps I was overreacting. Taking a deep breath, I decided to look. If I was wrong, I could always apologize. I searched for messages containing words like miss you, love you, good night, and hotel. There was nothing unusual beyond our own conversations. His financial transactions showed no suspicious transfers. No unexpected purchases or unusual expenses. I browsed his photo albums and social media. No compromising photos. Perhaps I was being paranoid. Then, in his company's group chat, I found Sandy's contact. He had saved her Instagram name in full. Nothing inherently strange. Yet, their personal messages were all erased, and their chat was set to Do Not Disturb. It felt too deliberate. I closed my eyes, willing myself to remain calm. But memories resurfaced. Leo's affectionate gaze at Sandy in the hospital, her shy tug at his sleeve, the way she looked at him when I led him away. The unease deepened. Even without direct evidence, disappointment settled in my chest like a suffocating weight. My pulse quickened as I tapped on a shopping app, acting on impulse. Browsing through pending deliveries, past orders, and transaction history, I found nothing unusual. Was he just that careful, or had I misjudged him completely? My finger hovered over a recent purchase. Shoes he bought not long ago. I sneered at the irony. Was I just imagining things? Accidentally, I tapped the More option at the bottom, revealing a delete order prompt. Without thinking, I clicked it. A confirmation message appeared. This order can be restored from the recycle bin on a computer. A sinking feeling washed over me. Heart pounding. I turned on the computer. The hum of the machine made my hands sweat. I cast a wary glance at the study door. Silence. Still, I wasn't reassured. Barefoot, I crept toward the bedroom. The door, left slightly ajar, allowed me to hear Leo's steady snoring. I listened for a while, ensuring he was deeply asleep, before returning to the study. Logging into the shopping app on the computer, I accessed the order recycle bin and restored the deleted purchase history. And there it was. Page after page of past orders appeared before me. My breath caught in my throat. Elegant, expensive couples' rings. Ones I had never seen. Luxury handbags I had never received. Sets of lingerie completely opposite my style. Scenes played out in my mind, each image more unbearable than the last. Moments of passion, intimacy, and betrayal. My grip on the mouse trembled. From dating to engagement, from marriage to this very moment, our love, our trust, crumbled to dust. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. For the first time, I wished he had changed his password. If only I hadn't looked. 5 minutes later, I wiped away my tears, taking deep breaths until I regained my composure. Breaking down now wouldn't help. I needed proof. He had concealed it too well. I had to be thorough. With shaking hands, I captured screenshots of every order. I recorded a video, ensuring I had evidence. My heart pounded erratically. Then, I noticed something even more damning. The recipient names, phone numbers, and addresses weren't mine, his, or even his workplace's. There was only one possibility. His mistress. I saved the phone number and searched it on Instagram. The result? An anime avatar, the same one saved under Sandy in Leo's phone. But the username? Rainy for you. Reality crashed down. My marriage was nothing but a farce. Deleting each order from the history felt like erasing the last remnants of my dignity. Each click was a fresh wound. The system automatically moved the records back to the recycle bin, as if mocking me. I tidied up and returned to the bedroom. His rhythmic snoring grated on my ears. Lying down, I heard him murmur in his sleep, "Darling." His hand reached out instinctively, searching for me. It was his habit, pulling me close when we argued, as if proximity could mend what was broken. Before, that warmth melted my anger. Now it made my skin crawl. I inched away, nearly falling off the bed. He turned over, undisturbed, and continued sleeping. I stared at his familiar silhouette. A man who once felt like home now felt like a stranger. One I despised. Why had he done this? I was attractive, well-groomed, kind and independent, successful in my career. I navigated social settings effortlessly. I could cook. We had met through a blind date and spent a year getting to know each other. He was mature, handsome, affectionate, and romantic. He once said meeting me felt like a love that had come too late. We were soulmates. Marriage was a well-thought-out decision, not a whim. Or so I believed. Before we got our marriage license, I once joked with Leo that if he ever fell in love with someone else, I would let him go. "Just tell me beforehand," I said, "even a second before you stop loving me." He had only smiled, patting my head indulgently. "Darling, a lifetime isn't enough to love you." Yet, just a year into our marriage, those words now felt laughable, bitterly ironic. He could have stopped loving me, but betraying our vows, our trust, and our marriage was unforgivable. As he slept beside me, his snoring gradually faded. A dark thought crossed my mind. I could strangle him right now. But then I took a deep breath. He wasn't worth ruining myself over. At the same time, letting him go so easily felt unacceptable. Rage burned inside me, making sleep impossible, but I knew I had to rest. I needed my strength, to think, to plan, to make sure he paid the price he deserved. That night, I was haunted by nightmares. Morning came, and I dragged myself out of bed, made a simple breakfast, and sat at the table, though everything tasted like ash in my mouth. From now on, I knew I'd have to wear a mask, hiding my true feelings. Divorce kept surfacing in my thoughts, but such a decision wasn't just about me. How would I explain it to my parents? They were getting old. Could they handle the shock? Why are you up so early? Leo's voice, groggy with sleep, cut through my thoughts. He yawned and reached out to embrace me, but my body instinctively stiffened, rejecting his touch. He hesitated for a moment, then kissed my forehead. Still upset about yesterday? His voice was gentle, coaxing, as if nothing had happened. His affectionate gaze made my stomach churn, but I forced a smile, unwilling to let him sense my disgust. He believed I could never resist his tenderness, but that was before he crossed the line. If you love and cherish me, I don't care if you're rich or poor, human or ghost. But if you betray me, I will make sure you suffer more than a ghost. He smiled as if nothing was wrong. When you get some time off, let's properly celebrate our anniversary. Maybe we should think about having a baby. I almost laughed at the absurdity. When we married, he insisted on waiting 2 years before having children. He wanted to focus on his career and pay off the mortgage first. Moved by his sincerity, I had even helped him with the payments. The house wasn't ready yet, and the monthly mortgage was a strain, but I had believed in our future. Now, I was beyond grateful that we had postponed having kids. I forced a thoughtful expression. We're short-staffed at the hospital. Dr. Emma is going on maternity leave soon, so I'll be covering more shifts. We'll have to wait at least 6 months. I caught a flicker of relief in his expression, though he tried to hide it. Does your workplace even care about human rights? He complained. They even want to control when you can have kids? I gave a small, awkward smile. You know how emergency medicine works. We have to plan pregnancies ahead of time. Fine. 6 months then, he relented. But if you do get pregnant, I want you to stop working immediately. It's too exhausting, and I don't want our baby at risk. I'll take care of you. I nodded, giving him the response he wanted. After breakfast, I washed the dishes while Leo hovered around, helping out like the attentive husband he pretended to be. Once, his care would have warmed my heart. Now it meant nothing. Suddenly, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Babe, I'll make it up to you when we have time off. I remained silent, letting him believe I was just sulking. Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about, he continued. This apartment is too small. If you get pregnant and my mom comes to help, it'll be too crowded. My grip on the plate tightened. I found a great 4-bedroom place. Good location. Great school district. If we sell this apartment, we can make the down payment. So this was what all his morning affection had been leading up to. The apartment we lived in had been a wedding gift from my parents. Since his premarital property wasn't ready, they had given it to us, even letting others believe it was bought by his family. They treated him like a son, trusting that by being kind to him, they were ensuring my happiness. But they forgot that some people are ungrateful. If I hadn't discovered his affair, I might have foolishly agreed, transforming my premarital property into shared marital assets. We're a couple, we should share everything, he said smoothly. Real estate prices are low right now, I said carefully, hiding my anger. Wouldn't a new mortgage be a burden? We haven't even finished paying off your loan yet. Would the bank approve another? I did the math, he said eagerly. This place can sell for around $800,000. We'd still need about $600,000, even with our savings. Maybe your parents could help. There it was. He wasn't talking about his parents. He meant mine. If you're pregnant, moving and renovations wouldn't be good for the baby. And my apartment won't be ready for another 2 years. The place I found is perfect for our future family. He kissed my cheek, trying to sweeten his proposal. I barely contained my disgust. I need to think about such a big decision, I said coolly. He frowned slightly but let it go. All right, I'm off to work. After he left, I wiped the spot where he kissed me, my stomach churning. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run as I stared blankly ahead. He had planned it all, using the idea of a child in a good school district to lure me in, expecting my parents to finance his perfect setup. If I hadn't checked his phone last night, I would still be walking blindly into his trap. Had I ever really known him? Before our wedding, my parents had hesitated about his unfinished apartment, but I had been naive. I had even considered adding his name to my parents' property as proof of my devotion. My brother had fought me on it, calling me foolish. We had argued bitterly. I had accused him of being jealous. In the end, my parents compromised. They said that if, after 3 years, I still wanted it, they wouldn't object. Was Leo really this impatient? Or had I just been too blind? Turning off the faucet, I grabbed my bag and drove to my brother's place. I had the night shift later, but I had time to rest during the day. Not that I could sleep. I drove slowly, unsure of what to do. Should I tell him? As I stood outside his apartment complex, debating with myself, my brother appeared, wearing his usual casual shorts and tank top, carrying a bag of breakfast. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. His usual carefree attitude vanished. What happened? Leo. I choked on my words. He cheated. The breakfast hit the floor. In a flash, he stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and made for the door. I grabbed him with all my strength, my tears falling freely. Bro, I don't have a home anymore. Can you please not make things worse? My brother froze, then threw the knife to the floor and began pacing the living room angrily, lost in thought. Wendy, if you forgive him, don't ever call me your brother again. He was clearly distressed, but I could see he was trying to keep his emotions in check. Mike, my older brother, turned 30 this year. 3 years ahead of me. Ever since childhood, he took pleasure in teasing and pushing me around. A bit of an eccentric, he remains single by choice, insisting he hasn't found someone worth committing his life to. I used to mock him for having a fear of marriage, but today, I understand. He simply has a clear head. He might tease me, but he won't let anyone else hurt me. The house. Were you tricked out of it? I shook my head in silence. At least you have some sense. So, what's your plan now? Mike sat me down on the sofa, gently wiping away my tears. Crying won't fix this, he said, though his own eyes were turning red. I don't want him to get away with it. My fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms, nearly drawing blood. I want him to suffer. I had never been so sure of anything. Mike, can you do me a favor? He gave a solemn nod. In all the years I'd known him, he had rarely been this serious. And don't tell Mom and Dad. That night, during my shift, I messaged Leo, asking him to come with me to my parents' house on my day off. He was thrilled, thinking I was about to convince them about the house. In reality, I needed those 2 days to calm down and plan my next move. Mike, for all his laid-back ways, was meticulous when he set his mind to something. His business had held steady through the years, even during the pandemic. When he handed me a thick stack of documents, I was stunned by his efficiency. Sandy had an older sister and a younger brother. At the age of 4, due to her family's financial struggles and their preference for sons, she was sent to live with relatives and wasn't reunited with her parents until adulthood. She had grown up suspicious, sensitive, and deeply resentful. Her family and brother drained her emotionally, yet she remained entangled in their grasp. Now she was engaged. The file contained details about her fiancé, including his phone number and social media profiles. I recalled Leo once mentioning Sandy's tough upbringing, her lack of education, and the frequent mistakes she made when she first joined the company. He often covered for her, and at the time, I had advised him to be patient. Everyone has a learning curve. Just as we had, fresh out of med school, reliant on senior doctors to guide us. Eventually, he stopped talking about her. I never gave it much thought, never imagined that he had taken care of her so well that he ended up in her bed. Her tragic past didn't justify her actions. Nothing could excuse her for wrecking my marriage. As I flipped through the files, a thought struck me. I logged into the clinic's medical record system. Even though our town is small, our hospital is the best in the area. Most people come to us when they're sick. I searched Sandy's name, filtering results for the past year. Several records appeared. I matched them by age and ID number, then printed the relevant ones. At that moment, I was grateful for the emergency department's access to all medical records. Due to the unpredictable nature of emergency cases, our department had authorization to retrieve patient histories beyond the standard protocol. I examined the records closely. Sandy had visited multiple times for gynecological issues, recurring menstrual pain, and frequent nosebleeds. Then, I remembered something: Leo's habit of taking melatonin every night. A nearly perfect plan for revenge began forming in my mind. I wanted them both to fall into ruin and despair. As soon as my shift ended, I left work without hesitation. I had an important meeting today, with Howard, Sandy's fiancé. When I first saw him, he was exactly as described. A simple, honest, and slightly awkward technician. When I laid out all the evidence before him, his expression contorted with disbelief. "You're lying," he insisted. Sandy wouldn't do that. I almost pitied him. Almost. "She's at my house right now," I said flatly. His face darkened. "Do you have proof? Did you record anything?" "Everything happened too suddenly," I admitted. "I didn't have time to set up surveillance." "Then it's just your word against hers," he snapped. "I trust my girlfriend. I won't let a stranger's accusations ruin our relationship." He had summoned all his courage to say it, but I could already see the doubt creeping in. I took out my phone, opening the app connected to my smart scale. Skipping past the usual statistics, I pointed at the weight records. 8 p.m. 45 kilograms. 11 p.m. 46 kilograms. 7:30 a.m. 44 kilograms. "Maybe they had a late-night snack," I said casually. I watched him waver, the weight of truth pressing down on him. After a long pause, he finally pulled out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. "What's up?" A sweet, lazy female voice answered, tinged with amusement. It was Sandy. "Isn't today the weekend? I miss you. Let's meet up." Howard was testing the waters, but I could tell he still held onto a faint glimmer of hope. "I've caught a cold," Sandy replied. "Give me a few days to recover, and then I'll come find you." "I don't want to get you sick." She deliberately sniffled and coughed twice. "I can come to your dorm and bring you some medicine," Howard offered. His expression hardened slightly when Sandy responded, "No, that's not necessary. I've gone back home. I'll see you after work on Monday, all right?" she added, but there was an unmistakable hint of panic in her voice. Howard hesitated but answered, "All right. I'll be working late these next couple of days too. See you Monday." Then he ended the call. She said she went home, not that she was home. A flicker of sadness crossed Howard's face as if he was speaking to himself. "Why are you telling me this? Why do you even have a scale at home?" "I bought a smart body fat scale because I was thinking about the future. If I ever decide to have kids, I want the best chances for a healthy pregnancy," I explained. It was meant to improve my health, but it turned out to be useful in another way. I let out a sigh. I wanted to save my marriage. "But your girlfriend doesn't seem to think the same way." As I spoke, I discreetly pinched my thigh, forcing a few tears to well up, playing the part of a desperate woman clinging to her husband. In this world, when men cheat, many women choose to forgive them. But when a man is the one betrayed, almost no one can accept it, regardless of status, wealth, or career. "Take me there," Howard finally said. Outwardly, I still looked sorrowful, but inside, I was smiling. People are strange creatures. They never want to be the ones betrayed. At first they refuse to believe it. But once the truth settles in, their curiosity, and their thirst for revenge, grows exponentially. The ones who break the rules for the thrill of it always convince themselves they won't face the consequences. They arrogantly assume they've covered their tracks. But reality has a way of exposing everything. I turned the doorknob carefully. What I saw in the living room is something I will never forget. Sandy was wearing my dress. They were tangled together, flushed, on the verge of going further. Maybe they heard the sound of the door because they turned their heads at the exact same moment. Our eyes met. I already knew Leo was cheating. I had prepared myself on the way here. I even convinced Howard to bring his girlfriend along so he could see it with his own eyes. But witnessing them, brazenly entangled on my couch, was still a bitter pill to swallow. Life was unbearably dramatic and cruel. Leo hastily pulled up his shorts, while Sandy stood frozen in shock. Before I could even process what was happening, a shadow flashed past me. A sharp slap echoed through the room. Howard had struck Sandy across the face with force. His voice roared with fury. "Weren't you supposed to be sick? Weren't you supposed to be at home? Wait, let me explain. It's not what it looks like." Sandy stammered, desperately trying to fix her dress. But halfway through her excuse, she faltered. She couldn't keep up the lie and abruptly changed tactics. "I was forced into this." Her words landed like an explosion. Howard immediately turned on Leo, fists flying in blind rage. Leo, initially too stunned and ashamed to react, soon fought back, and the two men were locked in a violent struggle. Punches, kicks, neither held back. As the fight escalated, they grabbed anything within reach to use as weapons. The chaos was overwhelming. The glass coffee table shattered with a crisp crash. I pulled out my phone and started recording. It was a shame. I had prepped a voice recorder the night before and even charged it, but in the shock of the moment, I had completely forgotten about it. Howard was like a wild beast, eyes burning red with fury. Even with Sandy clinging to him, Leo was at a disadvantage. Howard was younger, stronger, and fueled by unbridled rage. Sandy, caught in the crossfire, tried to intervene but ended up getting hurt instead. Both men, blinded by fury, blamed her for everything. No matter who she sided with, she was the villain in their eyes. The living room was soon wrecked beyond recognition. The door had been left ajar, and the commotion had drawn curious neighbors. People crowded around, murmuring, some recording the scene, others calling the police, further adding to the madness. Eventually, exhausted, the fight lost its momentum. Howard emerged as the victor, but there was no satisfaction in his face, only seething rage. He glared at Sandy, who had curled into a corner, trembling, crying softly as if she were the victim of great injustice. Leo, defeated, sat panting heavily, his face swollen and bruised, yet miraculously his nose remained unscathed. On the way over, Ikali had mentioned to Howard that in the ER, he'd seen countless fights where skilled brawlers knew exactly how to inflict pain without causing legal trouble. A calculated, controlled level of injury. I had also warned him about the fragility of the nose and eardrums. I switched off my phone and watched the premature end of the fight, cold and detached. What a shame. Howard hadn't hit hard enough. And Leo? He hadn't suffered enough. Even Sandy's reaction had been somewhat underwhelming. Much weaker than I had imagined. Perhaps Howard's presence had kept her from revealing her true nature. As the room quieted, Sandy's sobs slowed. She lifted her tear-streaked, bloodied face, pitiful yet absurd. I curled my lips into a mocking smile. In an instant, her usual wide-eyed innocence vanished, replaced by a venomous glare. Staggering forward, she spat. "You planned this, didn't you?" Feigning shock, I gasped. "You seduced my husband, destroyed my family, slept in my bed, and now you're blaming me?" My fists clenched behind my back. If she dared lay a finger on me, I wouldn't hesitate to strike back. I pretended to shrink in fear, watching intently to see Leo's reaction. But he hesitated. The moment Sandy lunged at me, Leo didn't move. Worse, his gaze held a flicker of pity for her. That was the moment I saw Leo for what he truly was. Sandy shrieked, "You bitch! Leo should have left you ages ago." She raised her hand to slap me, but I was ready. My palm struck her face. Hard. Then, without missing a beat, I backhanded her again. Good hit. Someone in the crowd cheered. She had it coming, stealing someone's husband and wrecking a home. Sandy stood there, stunned. Her face swelled instantly, humiliation shining in her tear-filled eyes. But she dared not speak another word. If she acted out any further, the crowd would tear her apart with their words alone. Howard grabbed her roughly, making her stumble. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" Sandy wailed. "They're all against me. Can't you see this is a setup? Howard, you're being manipulated by that bitch Wendy. I've done everything for you, and you still hit me." At last, Leo stepped between us, pointing a shaking finger at Sandy. "I told you. I never wanted you. I love my wife." Sandy choked on her sobs, rendered speechless. Outside, sirens wailed. The crowd at the door continued their ruthless commentary. Some condemned the shameless mistress, others the faithless scumbag. A few even sympathized with me and Howard. Hearing the approaching police, Sandy paled. Abandoning all dignity, she turned to flee. I casually extended my foot. She tripped, landing flat on her face. Take your clothes with you, I taunted. Furious yet helpless, Sandy stripped off the skirt and threw it on the floor. I tossed it back at her. Don't leave your filth behind. Trash belongs in the trash. The police arrived and took all four of us to the station for questioning. After giving our statements, we opted for mediation. Papers were signed, and we went our separate ways. The incident became the talk of the neighborhood. On the way home, I stayed silent, my expression unreadable. Whispers followed us. The neighbors pitied me while throwing cold sarcasm at Leo. Their words stung him deeply, turning his face red and white in turns. He was seething but had no way to retaliate. As soon as we stepped inside, Leo collapsed onto his knees, gripping my legs. I was wrong. Sandy seduced me. Please forgive me. I looked down at him, kneeling in the wreckage of his own making. It was almost laughable. Let's get a divorce. No. He clung to me desperately. We love each other. I made a mistake, but who doesn't? We can move past this. I squatted down, prying his fingers off my legs one by one. If you knew regret, why did you betray me? Leo panicked, sweat dripping from his bruised forehead. He grabbed his phone and right in front of me, sent Sandy a vicious voice message before deleting her contact information. Too little, too late. I swear I'll never have anything to do with her again. Leo's fierce determination unsettled me before he got caught. He masked it well, even shifting the blame onto me, making it seem like I was the one being unreasonable and causing him distress. Just last night, he and Sandy were intimate in this house. Even 2 hours ago, when Sandy attacked me, he didn't rush to my defense. Yet now, the moment I bring up divorce, he immediately cuts ties with her, as if switching loyalties in an instant. Does he truly seek my forgiveness, or is he simply buying time, waiting for the right moment to discard me? After all, he has yet to claim the premarital property gifted by my parents. The savings remain under my control. The mortgage on the house, for which he paid the down payment before our marriage, is still not fully paid off. Perhaps he sees no future with Sandy anymore. Weighing his options, he likely finds me more beneficial. In this society, a cheating husband who kneels and begs is expected to be forgiven. He thought he knew me, that I would ultimately yield. But the moment he betrayed our marriage, he lost the Wendy who once loved him unconditionally. The power dynamic shifted. I want to see him suffer, to watch him descend into his own downfall. He must pay for his actions. Today is only the beginning. I shut the door behind me and retreated into the guest room. Confronting him today was a spontaneous decision. I always believed that when it came to infidelity, Leo was the one truly at fault. Even if Sandy initiated things, had he truly wanted to refuse, nothing would have happened. But Sandy overstepped. She added me on Instagram and, in the early hours, posted a story only I could see. The image, her lying in my bed, with a man I knew all too well. Though his back faced the camera, I recognized Leo instantly. The caption, "What's stolen always tastes better." She wanted revenge. 2 days ago, Leo and I walked past her, arm in arm, and she felt abandoned. That fleeting moment must have reminded her of her own past, triggering her insecurities. So while I worked the night shift, she wasted no time. She came to my house, took my place, wore my dress, and slept in my bed with my husband, all while making sure I saw it. I sought out Howard but refrained from showing him the incriminating photos. I feared he would act impulsively, confront Sandy, and refuse to catch them in the act with me. There is nothing more powerful than witnessing betrayal firsthand. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those closest to us. Silent treatment is a dull blade. It won't kill, but it makes life unbearable. Leo started changing. He became more attentive, cleaning meticulously, more than ever before. He prepared elaborate breakfasts. I sat in silence, eating with an expressionless face, offering no words of appreciation. The food was well made, but I refused to acknowledge it. I watched him move around the kitchen, but when he glanced my way, I turned away, returning to the guest room. We slept separately. Conversations were minimal. If something could be said in one word, I never used three. He took time off work, making excuses to stay home and make it up to me. Whether it was for me or simply to avoid public embarrassment, I no longer cared. My life went on. If love was gone, I would shift my focus to my career. Yet I watched him. I observed the physical toll on him. I loved sweets, and out of guilt, Leo ensured I always had them after my shifts. I took symbolic bites, my cold demeanor softening just slightly. He noticed. He ate heartily, mistaking my reactions as signs of possible forgiveness. But he soon started seeing a pattern. Every time he finished his meal completely, my mood seemed to improve. His wounds healed, yet he inexplicably developed recurring mouth ulcers. His insomnia worsened, and even increased melatonin doses provided little relief. He woke up drenched in sweat, jolting from sleep for no apparent reason. Despite the air conditioning keeping the room comfortable, he frequently ran low fevers that came and went. Then, forgetfulness set in. The first real conversation we had since I asked for a divorce was over the gas valve. He had forgotten to turn it off. He lost his razor, and after a long search, I found it by the window. One morning, returning from my shift, I discovered he had left the front door unlocked. I called him immediately, furious. He tried to argue, but in the end, he sighed, promising to be more careful next time. Later that evening, I saw him carrying groceries home, avoiding my gaze as he slipped into the kitchen. Then came the hives, intense, unbearable itching, even in the most private areas. He visited a dermatologist, underwent allergy tests, but found nothing. Medications provided no relief. The symptoms came and went unpredictably, sometimes with a low fever. The physical torment, coupled with anxiety and insomnia, made him restless. He lost weight. He looked haggard. And I was pleased. "Are you still in touch with Sandy?" I asked casually over dinner. "Don't you trust me?" He slammed his chopsticks down, attempting to look angry, but his eyes were lifeless. "That's not important," I replied with a smirk. "What matters is that you don't infect me." A few days ago, I saw Sandy in the emergency room. She suffered from persistent nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. Leo's face went pale. "I'm full," I said, getting up. "I'm going to play some games." He stormed off to his study, staying there for hours. That night, once the house was silent, I checked his computer history. Searches included causes of insomnia, forgetfulness, low fever, night sweats, and mouth ulcers. Unexplained allergic reactions with no clear triggers. STDs transmitted through high-risk behavior. Early symptoms of HIV and its incubation period. Once paranoia over HIV sets in, it's like opening Pandora's box. Fear, anxiety, and despair consume the mind, leading to an inevitable breakdown. Doubt, once planted, grows relentlessly. How could I let this opportunity slip away? I would nurture this fear, water it, accelerate its growth. Certain diseases have a window period of 6 weeks to 3 months. Time was limited. The next day, after work, I noticed scratches on Howard's neck, as if from a struggle with Sandy. Her recent social media posts reflected a shift. Her hair was now cut short, and she concealed one side of her face. She looked miserable. Her caption read, "Starting over." She had been sending me cruel messages, flaunting intimate photos of her and Leo. Yes, they had met again in secret. Once a cheater, always a cheater. I recalled Leo's tearful plea when I first demanded a divorce. How desperate he looked. And now, he was the one drowning in fear. It seemed absurd to me. Men deceive with ease. His pleading was merely a delay tactic. Had I not intervened, Leo's Oscar-worthy performance and Sandy's efforts to provoke me would have been in vain. Leo's paranoia about him had escalated beyond control. With a little push from me, he confronted Sandy, channeling his anger towards her and uncovering the source of his torment. He wouldn't let Sandy walk away so easily this time. The concealment of her face might very well be a consequence of their confrontation. Feeling pleased, I prepared a grand meal that evening, knowing a storm was on the horizon. After dinner, Howard seemed unusually parched. He kept drinking repeatedly. Despite wearing light clothing, he appeared overheated and unsettled. "Can you stay still for a moment?" I asked while scrolling through my phone, keeping a close eye on him. "It's going to rain." "It's stiflingly hot," he muttered, adjusting the air conditioning. Sweat trickled down his face. Saying nothing, I retrieved a long shirt from the bedroom and slipped it on. Tonight, I would share the bedroom with Howard. Ever since his symptoms began, his desire had faded, even when he attempted to act affectionate or initiate intimacy. My reminder of his time with Sandy would extinguish any lingering longing. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed, Howard snapped, storming off to the bedroom. I knew he was furious with himself. When I entered the room, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Feigning slumber, I remained alert. He got up multiple times, either to use the bathroom or drink more water. Eventually, he settled and dozed off. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by an earth-shaking clap of thunder. Howard, finally asleep, was startled awake, sitting upright in terror, pale, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. At that moment, another bolt of lightning slashed across the sky. The brightness revealed the sheer panic on his face. Thunder rumbled ferociously. Howard trembled. The storm howled outside, hammering against the windows with relentless fury. To him, it must have felt like demons clawing at his sanity, draining every ounce of color from his face, leaving him ghostly pale. He turned to me. I continued my act, regulating my breath to sound deep and steady. He sat motionless, staring blankly into nothingness. I had no idea what was running through his mind. His eyes were vacant, lifeless. Outside, the storm raged on. I knew, at that moment, something inside him had finally shattered. The next day, Howard developed a relentless fever, slipping in and out of lucidity, mumbling incoherent phrases. I considered taking him to the hospital, but in his brief moments of clarity, he vehemently refused, insisting it was nothing more than a chill from the night before. His fear of doctors was profound, and I relished it. I administered fever medicine, staying home to monitor him. If his condition deteriorated, I would call for help, but only when necessary. I wasn't playing the devoted caretaker. I merely wanted to ensure I personally decided his fate. By evening, his fever finally broke. His face was no longer flushed, but his demeanor had turned irritable. He picked apart the porridge I had painstakingly prepared, ultimately turning his back on me, refusing to eat. Letting the fever take its course wouldn't have been the worst outcome. Yet when left alone, he spiraled into melancholy, muttering to himself in despair. Sometimes, his eyes would glaze over. I would call his name, and it would take an uncomfortably long moment before he acknowledged me. Other times, he would simply stare blankly before dropping his head again, lost in thought. I documented every instance of his erratic behavior. Watching his descent into madness filled me with exhilaration. It was all unfolding perfectly. Soon, I would no longer need to wear this mask while living under the same roof as him. The past 2 weeks had dragged on endlessly. Leo resisted going to the hospital, but against my persistence, he had no choice. I played the devoted wife, escorting him through every examination. Head CT, chest scan, MRI. All results came back normal. I even insisted on a full blood panel. Being a weekend, results wouldn't arrive until Monday. Since the blood test, Leo had been on edge. Some people fear bad news but cling to the illusion of health. Avoiding doctors keeps their delusion intact. No diagnosis, no problem. Next, I led him to the psychiatric department, presenting the doctor with my recordings of the previous night. A series of evaluations followed. The diagnosis: moderate bipolar disorder. Leo refused to accept it. He denied being sick and rejected medication. I surprisingly agreed with him. All I needed was for the psychiatric record to exist, for the foundation of my plan to be solidified. Bipolar disorder isn't so terrible, Wendy. You're a doctor too. You know that beyond therapy, consistent medication is crucial, the hospital insisted. I nodded, playing the role of the reluctant but compliant wife. But deep inside I was elated. I wanted to laugh, but restrained myself. I arranged sick leave for Leo, claiming he had persistent fevers without a diagnosis and needed further medical attention. During the pandemic, fevers were taken seriously. His employer quickly approved the leave, urging us not to return until we had answers. I had orchestrated it all, to strike fear into Sandy. After returning home, even before the STD and HIV results arrived, Leo's condition deteriorated further. He wandered aimlessly, broke into erratic singing, and then collapsed into bouts of profound despair. His eyes, once full of life, were now hollow, like an empty shell. Sometimes he would ask for medication. Other times, he would hurl it away, exhibiting suicidal tendencies. Ultimately, I had him admitted to the psychiatric ward, using the newly documented medical records to support my case. After leaving the hospital, I made a call to my mother-in-law. That's when I uncovered a hidden truth. Leo's father had suffered from severe mental illness and had taken his own life. At the age of 10, Leo had witnessed his father's suicide by hanging. I believe in science, in reason, in facts. Mental illness, from a medical perspective, often has hereditary components. And that played perfectly into my hands. But bipolar disorder isn't necessarily so. If he hadn't cheated, breaking our marriage and love, even if he had fallen into a deep depression, I would have been confident enough to stand by him. Selling the house and car to travel and lift his spirits would not have been an issue. The hospital contacted me multiple times later, informing me that Leo wanted to see me. I never went. I was preoccupied with filing for divorce. Given Leo's mental condition, the divorce was more complicated than usual, but I was well prepared. Our relationship had long since ended. I presented all the evidence of his infidelity in chronological order. It was legally valid and accepted by the court. From online records of catching him with Sandy to video footage taken by neighbors, police mediation records, and Sandy's photos, videos, and chat logs with Leo, including his medical reports, prescriptions, and videos of me fulfilling my role as a devoted wife, everything was documented. There were also clips of me hiding in fear during his bipolar episodes, quietly crying. In the end, the court granted the divorce. The majority of the property was awarded to me, but considering Leo's mental health, a small portion was given to him as well. His mother used his entire share to cover his hospital bills. That money ensured he would remain in treatment for a long time. A day after the divorce, I took Leo's lab report and visited him. The doctor informed me that his condition was worsening. He had even started refusing to eat. When I entered, I saw Leo curled up in a corner of his hospital room. Despite always being well-groomed, he ignored the filthy state of his hospital gown. He was scratching at the wall with his fingers, his eyes vacant, murmuring to himself, "I'm not sick. I'm not sick." Only a few months had passed, yet he looked significantly older, drained of his former vitality. I chuckled softly. "Of course you're not sick. What illness could you possibly have?" Hearing my voice, Leo lifted his head in shock. When he saw it was me, a fleeting light flickered in his dull eyes before turning into a furious glare. "Wendy, you planned all this, didn't you?" I shrugged with a smile. "What does this have to do with me?" Leo shook his head, thinking, then suddenly rushed at me like a madman. However, the iron security door of his room was locked, leaving only a small window. "Then why do I feel so awful? Do I have AIDS?" I took out the lab report and waved it in front of him. "You're perfectly fine." "Then why?" he muttered, confused. I smirked and spoke slowly. "Your symptoms were caused by your diet." "Why was I feverish, sweating, forgetful, and having allergic reactions?" he asked. I laughed lightly. "I turned off the air conditioning at night. In the middle of summer, that gets uncomfortable, right? As for the fever, with the drafts from the 9-story building, catching a chill is easy." "And my forgetfulness?" he pressed. I chuckled. "I deliberately moved your belongings around and shut off the main gas valve in the kitchen. I didn't mention the rashes, as they had nothing to do with me. Nor did I explain that melatonin's effects on insomnia are limited. And Sandy, she kept experiencing random nosebleeds for no apparent reason." I smiled but said nothing. I wouldn't tell him that there's a condition called nasal endometriosis, where endometrial tissue in the nasal cavity causes nosebleeds during every menstrual cycle. But the bipolar disorder, that part is real. I finished with a triumphant smile. "Wendy, you bitch. I'll kill you. I'm not sick. Let me out." Leo screamed, slamming his fists against the glass until his hands bled. Doctors and nurses rushed in. "Quick. Room 32 is having another manic episode." Feigning fear, I watched coldly as a nurse injected a sedative into Leo. His struggles weakened, his body went limp, and finally, he fell silent. As I left the hospital, I hummed a cheerful tune. Whether sick or not, no one believes a mental patient who insists they are well. A few days later, after work, I witnessed a man carrying a girl into the emergency room. "Doctor, help! She drank pesticide." I recognized the man immediately. Howard, Sandy's boyfriend, wearing a mask. Peeking into the emergency room, I saw Sandy. She was barely conscious, foaming at the mouth. Even from a distance, the strong garlic odor of pesticide filled the air. I later learned from Howard that after the cheating scandal, he broke up with Sandy and reclaimed the engagement money. That's when he discovered she had used it for her brother's house down payment. With the money gone, Sandy's status at home plummeted. She became the disgraced daughter who had shamed her family, the useless sister who had failed her brother. Around that time, Leo was on leave. Sandy's recurrent nosebleeds made her paranoid, convinced she had an incurable disease. She kept coming to the hospital for blood tests. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She repeatedly begged Howard to reconcile, but he refused. That day, she threatened to commit suicide by drinking pesticide. The emergency room doors closed. Doctors and nurses worked frantically to save her life. As for Sandy, whether she lived or died, it was no longer my concern.